the early evening of December 9th, 1965, thousands of people from right around the area to as far as Ontario, Canada, reported seeing a strange object in the sky. Not only was this a strange lighted object, but it seemed to have a controlled path, unlike a meteor that would just go through the sky. If you haven't guessed already, I'm talking about the famous UFO incident of 1965 from Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. Hi, welcome to Around the Town with Marilyn Forbes. I cannot tell you how excited I am to be bringing the show to you folks today. This is probably one of my most highly requested shows from over the years. People always say, my goodness, why don't you do a show on Kecksburg? And we finally are able to do that with nobody else who could possibly be better than Stan Gordon. Stan has researched this from actually the very night it happened. He's going to tell us about remembering the night in question that we're talking about, and he's researched it since. He's going to tell us all about the theories, all about the interviews he's had, and we're also going to talk just about some UFOs in general. Because I'm sure probably a lot of you out there have seen something up in the sky, late night on your porch or walking or as you're driving down a dark road. You think, what could that be? A meteor? A weather balloon, or is it a UFO? So folks, put on your aluminum foil hats, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Well, it is my pleasure to finally be having this gentleman on the show. This is definitely probably one of the most requested shows that I've ever had. Fans have been asking me for years, please do a show on the Kecksburg UFO incident, and who else would I do that show with other than Stan Gordon? Stan, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. Actually, Stan just told me now that very night in 1965, correct, he actually started researching the Kecksburg incident that very night. I think that's really interesting. Tell us about that.
It was breaking on the news. Breaking on the. But I've been doing this since 1959, and people always ask, "How did you get involved at such a young age?" Well, 1959, I'm 10 years old, and on my 10th birthday, my parents gave me an AM radio as a birthday gift, and I was tuning around the AM radio dial that night, and because of being around the Halloween season, there were radio shows talking about haunted houses and UFOs and strange things, and I was a curious 10-year-old, and I wanted to know, these people making these stories up, they telling the truth. So I began to make a lot of trips to the Greensburg Library and read all the books they had. Began to cut articles out of the newspaper, make scrapbooks. And later on, if something would appear in the local paper where somebody claimed to see, for example, a UFO, I called them on the phone and interviewed them and kept records of it. That's how it all began for me. And to the surprise of most people, in all the years I've been doing this, now 59 years, I have never seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself.
I think that's amazing. He's told me that before, but I know you've heard literally, probably at this point in time, thousands of stories of different.
And it never ends. And yet, I've interviewed many, many credible people from all backgrounds and all age groups. I've seen a lot of evidence out in the field, but I've never had my own personal encounter. But people continue to report seeing strange things all the time, all year round. This year's been very active with reports around Western PA and other areas, and people are seeing things out there, which some things we can explain, some things we can't, and it's making life very interesting.
Now, before we move on to Kecksburg, which I know you're all dying to hear about, actually ask Stan. Stan specializes in Pennsylvania and the southwestern Pennsylvania area, or mostly Pennsylvania?
I cover the whole state, but I get a lot of reports are focused on southwest PA. So the greater Pittsburgh area, Westmoreland, Fayette, Indiana, Somerset, Washington, Greene, that whole area, we get a lot of reports in.
Okay. Now tell us, before we do Kecksburg, a couple of the other larger known incidences that you've dealt with.
Oh boy, I mean, I've dealt with literally thousands of UFO cases. And the first thing I want to mention is when I began to do investigation in 1965 in the field, so I've been out in the field investigating incidents since that time. And I've had some amazing cases go on. And one thing I found was that initially a lot of the reports, whether it be a UFO or a Bigfoot or any phenomena, they initially may sound strange and unusual, but when you take the time to properly investigate them, many of them turn to be either natural or man-made in origin. Especially with UFOs, a lot of misidentifications. Bright planets and stars at night. Right now we're getting a lot of calls of bright Venus in the evening sky if it's clear. You get big fireball meteors coming over the area on occasion. We've had some in the last year. You get a lot of calls on those. On occasion you get re-entry of space debris. You get the space station moving over. You get people launching Chinese lanterns. We got the doggone drones I got to deal with now. Okay, so there's a lot of things you can figure out. But year after year, there are many UFO incidents you could not easily explain. And many of these are not lights in the sky. These are large structured craft lowered to the ground. Of all the ones, of course, there's many, we could talk for days about the case I investigated. And of course, the most famous one is that October 25th, 1973, multiple witness UFO landing outside of Uniontown. The state police called my team up that night. It's a long story, but the base of the story was multiple people see this huge glowing object land in a field, and there were two Bigfoot-like creatures in the field at the same time. That turned out to be one of the most dramatic, one of the most amazing cases ever documented, and I'm sure at some time we'll talk more about that. But just to give you an example of a UFO incident that is very, very, was pretty famous around this area, September 3rd, 1987. This occurred right on busy Route 30 by what was then the Green Gate Mall.
I remember this.
Okay,
Okay, go ahead.
and there were multiple witnesses, including law enforcement. And it was early that evening when they see this huge, elongated, cigar-shaped object, maybe 300 feet long, maybe about 300 feet off the ground, elongated, metallic, with multiple lights on it, making no sound, and it crossed Route 30, crossed across the road where the power substation is, and as people are watching this huge object moving horizontally, it turns vertical in the sky, and when it does, all the power in the area goes out. Okay. Now later on, behind what was then the annex where the theaters were behind the Green Gate Mall, that area remained blacked out for quite a period of time. When the engineers went to investigate, they found all three of the master fuses had been blown. Apparently something is just very, very unusual and rare. And but I've seen a pattern for years and years of these objects commonly around energy sources such as high tension power lines and power plants and power substations. And there's many reports across Pennsylvania and around the country of the phenomena being associated with energy sources.
Now, is there a certain time of the year that you find that you're getting more calls, more sightings?
You get reports all year round in all kind of weather conditions, from snowstorms to beautiful Sunday afternoons. You get reports all year round. You always get more when the season's better. So spring, summer, more people are out, more people are seeing things.
That makes sense.
But we get reports all year round, all hours of the day and night.
Okay, now, before we go on any further, I did want to point out that Stan actually does have a hotline. We'll give all that information whenever we're done here. It's 24 hours a day. Anytime you see anything or you want to report, you can just call up this hotline. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's been open since 1969.
Oh, wow.
It never stops ringing.
Okay.
And it was one of the only places in the country for years and years that you actually had a place to call. And I had, for years and years, I had teams of scientists and research people who would go out and investigate the reports. So we were actually out in the field, and my teams were responding around the clock. And so there were many, many cases. We were on the scene within minutes to hours after they occurred, which is why we were able to document this information so thoroughly.
Now, I know that whenever someone say I would call, I would have a sighting, and I know you want as much information as possible. Do you have to give your name?
You do not have to. A lot of people call them anonymous. Even if you give me your name, I'm not going to use it. Okay, I never do it without permission, because most of the witnesses call in, especially with Bigfoot and some of these close UFO sightings, they are very reluctant to. They don't want any publicity.
That's why I brought that up.
Yeah, they don't want to. They don't want any publicity. They have nothing to gain by it. They just want to, like, did anybody else see this? Are you aware of these kind of reports? And quite often they feel a lot better after they talk, because they realize they're not the only ones seeing the same thing. And very commonly, if somebody sees a sighting, within hours to days, weeks, days later, I'll get reports from other people in the same area that saw something similar. Yeah.
That's amazing. Now, I think really and I know probably most of you out there are familiar with the story of what happened here in Kecksburg in 1965. What I thought was really interesting, though, I was doing some research before I met here today with Stan, and this incident actually is considered to be like one of the top 20 since, I believe, 1952. Like, I don't want to say popular, but I guess well-known, best-known UFO incidents, and I think that's pretty cool. It's right here in our own backyard. So we're going to start. Take us back to 1965, December 9th. What happened?
Well, gee, we could talk for days and days about what I've been working on the case for 53 years.
Okay. The short version of what happened.
The short version was, it was Thursday night, December 9th, 1965. I'm tuned into KDK Radio in Pittsburgh. They had a talk radio show at the time called Contact, and the host of the show was Mike Levine.
Okay.
But he had a special guest on that, and I don't want to listen to. His name was Frank Edwards, who was a reporter, journalist who had written some books on unusual happenings. So I wanted to see what he had to say. Well, very interestingly, pretty much the entire show was focusing on this breaking news story of this brilliant fireball that was seen from Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And as the time went on, they were breaking in with special reports. They were interviewing eyewitnesses. They were reading the breaking news story, the wire stories coming across of this object. And there were multiple reports coming in from the greater Pittsburgh area about 4:47 p.m., so it's just getting dark around here. And many people saw this object come across the greater Pittsburgh area. What we now know was it moved out in the Westmoreland County over Greensburg, And again, there's a lot we didn't know at the time, which I uncovered over many, many years. That object, whatever it was, went up roughly Route 30 east, but then made a turn to the south and came down through like Pleasant Unity and Norvelt, and was seen over the Kecksburg area, went out to the mountains of Laurelville, kind of hesitated, turned back, came back towards Kecksburg, made another turn and went down into the Wooded Ravine.
So it was navigated. It wasn't just a random.
Yeah, it was not a meteor.
Okay.
Okay, this thing was changed and was moving relatively slowly. And some of the witnesses around here, it was in the afternoon, and this thing was very low above their head. I mean, some witnesses said it was only a couple 100 feet above them. So they could clearly see, in some cases, depending on their angle, depends on the altitude and their position. Some of them, this thing passed very close overhead, so they could see a large structured body to it. It wasn't just a flame. And the witnesses I interviewed close to here, right where before it fell, and people who saw it go down, said this thing was moving relatively slowly. When it descended, it did not come down at a high rate of speed, like you would have if you have associated with like a meteor or re-entry of space debris. They said it came down almost like it made a controlled landing, but nobody reported any parachutes at the site. Okay. And then what we did not know at the time was that some of the local residents, after they saw it fall, ran down into the Wooded Ravine, and they came across this large metallic acorn-shaped object semi-buried in the ground. So some of these witnesses were only a few feet away from it. And first he had the civilians. Then he had the volunteer firemen coming in. And then later the military showed up. So what's so important that the military would respond so quickly to a small farming community like Kecksburg?
I was actually going to ask you. Does that's a rare occurrence, correct? I mean, just for
extremely unusual. Okay. And what we learned from people who were there that night, and what I later learned, was that a lot of people heard about this on the news. It was breaking on Pittsburgh radio and TV. So hundreds of people descended on the small farming community that night to try to get a look at the object. And you go up some of those farm roads, and people said you could barely move and get cars around. There was so many hundreds of people up there trying to see this thing, but they couldn't get down to the woods because the authorities on the scene wouldn't let them get down. Well, what the authorities didn't know was some people got down there before they arrived. Okay. And then later some volunteer firemen came across the object as well. So there were so many people involved. But again, what we found out was that this object fell. Witnesses estimate this thing is about 10 to 12 feet more in length, about 8 to 10 feet in diameter, like a big oversized metallic acorn, kind of an off-gold bronze color. But there's no weld marks, no seams, no rivets on it, no wings, no fuselage, no windows they could see. But on that raised up back of the object, like you have on an acorn, you had those unusual markings that some people said looked more like symbols.
Like hieroglyphics
right.
Or something.
And one witness, because his background is only a few feet away from him, was familiar with Cyrillic, a Russian, who had been Soviet back then, and he said that is not what it was. And later, as he spent time looking in books and libraries, looking at ancient writings, he said to him it looks similar to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, from what he could recall. Okay.
Wow.
But then what I found out in the summer of 1990, before we did the Unsolved Mysteries TV show, a man contacted me. I was able to check his background, and later over the years, others who he didn't know confirmed the same story. He told me he was a member of the Air Force Police. He was a member of the security team that guarded the object from Kecksburg when it left here on the military flatbed tractor trailer covered with a tarp. It went to Lockbourne Air Force Base near Columbus, Ohio. Came in during the early morning hours of December 10th. He said it came in on the flatbed truck. They backed into a hangar. They set up a security perimeter around that hangar. They were given a shoot-to-kill order to anybody approach that hangar without the proper clearance. Now, he told me, he said, I didn't stay on the team much longer, but he said, I heard that the truck and the object continued on to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Later, others told me exactly what building it went to at Wright-Patterson. Now, if it's still there today, we don't know. It may be there. We've heard rumors have been moved, but we have no way of knowing at this point.
Okay, so then I'm going to back you up. That night then, the military came in, and I'm assuming they evacuated the area as much as they could. They didn't want people down in that area and such?
Well, they were keeping people out from the impact site down in the woods, okay? And my understanding was, and I was told, as so many people were coming in, they began to close a lot of the little roads off around here so they couldn't get anywhere near it. Okay. But a lot of people had already come in. Well, what they didn't know was that some people initially had seen it and went down the woods, and then later some people snuck down into the woods. And there were actually some people down the woods hiding that they didn't know about that was watching the recovery operation I was able to find Yeah,
An interview.
yeah, and so anyhow, that's very, very fascinating too. But what was interesting over the years, different people, and some have gone on public record and said, armed soldiers actually aimed their weapons at civilians on other people's private property to prevent them from going down to the crash site. So what was so important down there for them to do that? Where did that jurisdiction come from?
Now, what did the military say? What was their verdict? First of all, did they deny even being here for the longest time? Or am I remembering correctly?
The only official government document we found was from the Air Force Project Blue Book report, and it took us years to find it. It was not listed under Kecksburg; it's listed under Acme, Pennsylvania.
Oh.
Okay, and I believe the reason is because I found the family that the Air Force interviewed that day. They live within walking distance of here, but they had an Acme mailing address.
Okay.
So I've always felt the Air Force listed under Acme rather than Kecksburg. Okay. And now I've lost my thought on what you had asked me.
What did I ask you? What did I ask? I lost my train of thought. Yeah. No. What was the official report?
Oh,
What did they say?
Okay. So the next day, the official report was that people had been mistaken. Nothing had fallen from the sky. They had seen a bright meteor, but the search did go. There was a search in the early morning hours, but they found absolutely nothing. And officially, that's how it stands. I remember within days after it happened, there was talk all around here, people seeing that large military flatbed tractor trailer with the object with a tarp over it coming out of this area at a high rate of speed late that night. There were many, many people that saw it.
So it was actually that evening then that this object was removed.
Early the next morning.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
But that same day.
Yeah, but I've also, there's a lot of little details that I worked on for years and years, and for years and years, I kept some of them quiet because I wanted to get more confirmation. I still have some like that today. But one of those details was that there was information, and now it's pretty good information, that there were 2 military flatbed tractor trailers out here at the scene.
Oh.
One went out earlier with a flatter load on it, and the other one with the object went out later that night, earlier in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a little intrigue about that as well.
Oh, wonder what was on the second one. Well, we don't even know.
Don't know. There's a lot of interesting stories and speculation out there, which I know we won't have time to get into. But there could well be more to the story than meets the eye.
And Stan and I, as I said, we were talking before we started filming, and I encourage anybody that has any information on this to please get in touch with him. Call the hotline.
Sure. Call my phone number. Email me. If you go to Google, type in my name, you'll find my website, stangordon.info. Okay, it's the website. They can email me at paufo@comcast.net. And then the phone, they can call me at 724-838-7768 to report UFOs, Bigfoot, anything unusual. Something else we're getting more reports on around this area, these mystery booms, which they've been going on for years and years, but in the last 2-3 years, we're getting an increase in Southwest PA. There have been incidents in Fayette County. I've heard reports from Allegheny. I've heard reports from Westmoreland of these large booms that are shaking foundations of homes or whatever over large distances in the last few years and even recent months. So we're interested in those reports as well.
Well, that's something I read about the Kecksburg incident that they called them, they were similar to sonic booms that they heard in the Pittsburgh area.
Yeah, and close to this area too. That afternoon, reportedly, yeah.
Oh, do you have any idea what that would be? What the loud noise would be?
Well,
your opinion.
Well, it could have been related to the reentry of the thing coming in the atmosphere.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
Okay.
at some distance, and then it was slowing down. Yeah.
But Stan is hoping maybe back in 1965 there were some people that clicked some photos. He said he's heard some rumor a couple times out there that there may be some people that actually have some photographs. Maybe you're not even aware you have some. But I know that's something that would be priceless for you to have, even copies.
Well, historically, it would be priceless. Okay, and I truly believe that. Talking to many people, I've talked to people over the years who said they saw the black and white photos taken of military and even the object down in the woods. We understand that the late John Murphy, who was the news director at WHJB, who was, from what we know, was probably the first reporter on the scene, and he wouldn't publicly talk about it, but later people we worked with and his former wife at the time had indicated that he did get down into the woods before the authorities got there, and he reportedly got photographs of this thing.
Wow.
And I talked to at least one person who saw the picture. Then all that stuff vanished in the next week or two. But we understand that at some point some of the authorities confiscated the film from his camera, I believe it was, but he had a roll in his pocket they didn't know about. Okay, but that's something that wasn't very well known at the time, but later came out over the years.
Now, can you imagine if something like this happened today with everybody with their cell phones and
Yeah.
everything? Oh my gosh, the documentation you would have would be awesome.
Yeah, a lot different story, and we do get pictures. I get photographs in, I get game cam pictures in of different things, videos. Unfortunately, the digital cameras are not designed to focus and take pictures, especially at night. So you get a lot of pictures, and the circuitry actually distorts what you're seeing. So a lot of the pictures really don't tell you a lot. But on occasion, we get lucky and we get some decent pictures.
Awesome. Yeah, I was thinking that whenever we were talking, you probably do get more pictures now than you did before.
Yes.
Because of the, I mean, 15 years ago, people didn't normally drive around with a camera in their car.
Right.
Not, I do, but most people don't.
Yes.
Now, tell us also, we want to hear about Stan's books. Stan actually is an author as well, and he's penned a couple books over the years. You want to tell us about these real quick?
This was the first book. It's called Really Mysterious Pennsylvania. It deals with sightings a lot in this area where people are physically very close to UFOs, Bigfoot, other phenomena that are very close sightings. And then probably the most popular is Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Casebook. It's about the massive UFO Bigfoot wave here in 1973 and 74 when there was multitudes of reports coming in and hundreds of UFO reports, many Bigfoot sightings, including many in daylight, all through this area. And we uncovered some of the very strangest aspects of Bigfoot anybody ever uncovered. So it's in the book, and it's all from around here, especially Fayette and Westmoreland County. Then this is the latest book, Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania's Unknown Creatures, and it gets into all kind of weird, from Bigfoot to the giant bird sightings, the Thunderbirds, Black Panthers, other weird creatures seen all through this area, including Mount Pleasant Township. Wow. And then, of course, I produced, this is an award-winning video I produced on Kecksburg called Kecksburg, The Untold Story. And it's still very popular, but it is a very detailed documentary. Unfortunately, many of the people in here are locals, are now deceased. But I wanted to do this to preserve it historically so they could tell their story in detail. Because, you know, we did a lot of TV shows on this, and some of the witnesses were interviewed, but they only had seconds to a minute or two to tell their story. They couldn't really tell it. I wanted to give them the opportunity to get into great detail, so we have it for historical sake.
Awesome. Now, where can people get all of these items?
They're available like at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, on my website, and so they're out there.
Okay, wonderful. Oh, I can't thank you enough. Is there anything that you wanted to add about Kecksburg? Let me ask you, what do you think landed in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania that night in 1965?
Well, I wish I had the answers. I keep an open mind to all possibilities. There are multitudes of theories from the time it happened. The first theory I heard came from a family who was interviewed by the Air Force. And they told them that a Gemini capsule had been expelled in the area. And of course, we found that that was not the case. And many theories that this was a Soviet Venus probe that may have re-entered the atmosphere and came down. In more recent years, there's a lot of new data on that. That's been pretty much eliminated as well. And then you got many other theories out there. Some in the last couple of years, of course, the one that fascinates a lot of people is it was a German Nazi bell, Die Glock, even though I've seen no evidence that the two are related or in fact that the Nazi bell became a reality, even though that we know they were working on such projects. But anyhow, we just don't know. There's a lot more to the story we have time to talk about. This thing, whatever it was, it's moving slowly. It's making change in direction. It's making a slow descent without parachute. It's completely intact. Has no rivet marks, no weld marks, no seams. And in the last 20 years, there's some very interesting information which suggests a possibility there could have been someone or something inside of the object.
Oh wow. That
That's
gives me
another
chills.
whole story.
That gives me chills. Well, thank you. This has been absolutely awesome. I know the viewers are going to love this. As I said, this has been definitely one of my most requested shows, and people named you by name, so you're out there. People know you as a UFO/Bigfoot expert for the area.
Well, thanks for having me on. We appreciate it.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Oh, would we be remiss if we did not mention, I almost forgot. There is actually a special event held right here every year. Used to be, it's a long story and I promise I won't bore you, but the volunteer fire department used to have a fireman's fair and they weren't doing real well because a lot of people have fireman's fairs. So then whenever the interest in the incident that happened here started getting, I guess, hotter, more interest, they started having a UFO festival, and it has really grown. I was here last year. I could not believe how much, just so much going on. But one thing that really is a big highlight is they have some wonderful speakers every year. And Stan, you're going to be a speaker this year, correct?
Yes, and we actually going to have a really good conference the afternoon of Sunday. So it's July 27th, 28th, and 29th this year. And Friday night is the half-price food night, and we get huge crowds for that. Saturday is the main day. You got the parade, you got the ongoing events, you got the fireworks at night. We have UFO and Bigfoot researchers there. All kind of vendors. They're gonna have food vendors. People from all over the country come in for this now. It's not just even just a local event.
amazing.
People actually come for thousands of miles, come here and spend the weekend from across the country. It's amazing.
Are you going to have your display set up
Yeah,
again as well?
I'll be in there
He
on
has
the display.
amazing things. It's just if nothing else, please stop and see what Stan has, and come to the conference and listen. I have the lineup of speakers here. If I can read this. Okay, this year we are going to have. Is this in order, or is this just who they're
Yes,
going to
it
be?
can be in order.
Okay, Stan himself here. He's going to be talking. Bob Gaddy.
Bob Gaddy.
And who's he?
Well, Bob Gaddy was one of the original Tribune Review reporters who was on the scene that night. I wrote the original story.
Oh, cool.
So he's
Okay.
coming to share what he recalled from what he experienced that night, being here on the scene. And we also going to have Ed Kellerman's going to talk about. He's a local author. He's done a lot of research on ghosts and hauntings and books about that around here. And then we're going to be showing 2 films. Okay, Seth Breedlove, who's the award-winning filmmaker from Small Town Monsters from Ohio, does great award-winning videos. He produced a special film called Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, which features a lot of my research about all the weird things that go on around here year after year along the Chestnut Ridge, one of the most active areas in the country for Bigfoot and UFOs every year. But he's going to show in the film, and it has a great section on Kecksburg in it. And then we're also going to have Aaron Dunbar, who's a local author and producer, and he wrote a book called A Wish for Giants, and they produced a new movie, just came out in February. It's a full-length motion picture done in Pennsylvania. It's about a young girl with a terminal brain disease, and her last wish is to meet Bigfoot. And it's a very, very nice family film, so they'll be showing that here as well.
Oh, awesome.
So you'll want to get here early to get a seat, because we start at 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon,
Okay.
and we get huge crowds, and it fills up very quickly. So if you want to get a seat, you want to get here very early.
Well, definitely. Folks have to even check out like as Stan said, the whole festival itself. Saturday is they have a lot of really fun games, and their parade is a little bit different than most parades you see. We have aliens. Last year it was pretty awesome. They actually had somebody that did a replication of this with a tarp over it on a flatbed truck. We have all kinds of interesting people, and you'll see lots and lots of aluminum foil hats. Well, thank you again. This was really a pleasure. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed the show. I know I do. I found that subject fascinating for years. And as Stan said, people just love it. They keep getting more information, more theories, and I think it's something that's going to be around for a long time. Actually, I'm standing right in front of the area. Back behind me someplace here is where something actually did come down that night. What it is, we may never know, but possibly maybe with some modern technology and research, we will find out what landed in Kecksburg that night in 1965. So again, thanks, folks. I did want to tell you now, Stan's going to be joining us again sometime in October, and we're going to be talking all about Bigfoot. As he said in the show, there's been a lot of new sightings, not only Bigfoot, but some other strange creatures, especially a tall skeletal one he was telling Rick and I about. I can't wait to hear more about. So be sure you check the listings out for October. We're going to be meeting with Stan again then. And again, folks, hope you enjoyed the show. And remember, keep smiling, keep dreaming, and keep watching.